In September of 2020, the USS Nimitz was transiting the North Arabian Sea during a routine deployment. Life aboard the aircraft carrier followed its usual structure: scheduled watches, quiet corridors, and sailors moving through long shifts that blended into one another. That night, Information Systems Technician 2nd Class Ian McKnight was on duty, assigned to a normal watch station and performing work he had done many times before. At some point during that watch, Ian McKnight disappeared. There was no alarm raised at the moment, no one witnessed a fall, no sound marked the event. When the next shift arrived, they found that the watch post was unattended. A head count confirmed what the empty space already suggested: a sailor was missing from the ship. The Navy refers to incidents like this as a silent overboard. Without a confirmed time or location, search efforts become an exercise in estimation, calculating currents, wind, and hours already lost. Within a short window, the possible search area had expanded beyond visibility. For the next 48 hours, the USS Nimitz and the USS Princeton conducted coordinated search operations across the surrounding waters. Aircraft were launched, radar scans were run continuously. Every available measure was taken, but the sea offered no answers, and the search was eventually concluded. We often talk about the 60-foot drop as a height, but what matters more is the speed. By the time a sailor falling from the flight deck reaches the surface, their body is moving at roughly 40 to 45 miles per hour. One moment, there is solid steel under your boots. Next, the water meets your body like concrete, stealing your breath, orientation, and control in an instant. At that speed, the ocean is not something you fall into. It's something you collide with. With that, water does not act like a liquid. It acts like a non-Newtonian fluid. If you hit feet first with your toes pointed, you might survive with shattered ankles. If you hit flat, the water creates a massive deceleration force that can cause internal organs to tear away from their connective tissue. This is known as organ stripping. If someone survives the impact, the body doesn't ease into the water. It panics. The moment skin hits 40 degrees seawater, the nervous system takes over. There's no time to think, nor a chance to prepare. The chest snaps open in an involuntary gasp. It happens whether you want it to or not. If your face is underwater in that first second, water rushes in instead of air, and that moment alone can decide everything. At that point, staying afloat isn't about willpower anymore. It's about whether the body can still obey the brain. When the call "man overboard" is finally passed, the ship doesn't stop in place. An aircraft carrier weighs close to 100,000 tons, and all that mass carries forward no matter what the engines do. Even with full reverse power, the ship continues moving for miles, pushing water aside as if nothing even changed. On the bridge, the focus shifts to bringing the ship back without adding new risks. The helm orders a Williamson turn. That's a maneuver designed to reverse course while keeping the sailor clear of the ship's propellers. The rudder is turned hard toward the side the sailor went over, steering the stern away from the water where they are believed to be. After the carrier reaches roughly 60 degrees off its original heading, the rudder is thrown hard in the opposite direction, and the ship begins to arc back along the same path it just traveled. The churned water of its wake becomes a rough reference point, one of the few visible signs of where a person might still be. As the ship turns, an MH-60S Seahawk helicopter lifts off from the flight deck. Crews from squadrons like the Saberhawks or the Golden Falcons head straight toward the last known position. They fly low and slow, eyes fixed on the surface, searching for movement, color change, or anything that doesn't belong in the open water. When something is spotted, the helicopter hovers and the rescue swimmer is lowered into the sea. For the sailor in the water, that swimmer is more than just a pair of hands. Many survivors later describe the same moment, seeing the fins touch the surface, hearing the rotor overhead, realizing someone has found them. The body begins to settle, breathing steadies, panic slowly loosens its grip. Hope in those moments helps to keep the body working just long enough to survive. Now, falling from a nuclear submarine is an all different breed of terror. Unlike the carrier, a submarine is low to the water. You aren't falling 60 feet, you're falling 15, but you are falling into a vacuum. As a submarine moves at 20 knots, it creates a Venturi effect along its hull. The water isn't pushing you away, it's sucking you toward the massive 7-bladed bronze screw at the stern. These propellers are so large and move so much water that they create cavitation pockets, which are basically areas of low pressure that can pull a human body into the blades before the bridge even knows you're gone. Submarines also face the visibility crisis. A sub is black, matte, and designed to be invisible. So when it turns around to find you, it has no high perch lookouts. It is searching from the waterline. If the swells are just 3 feet high, a human head becomes impossible to see. This is why submariners often wear strobe lights on their gear. A tiny, flickering LED is the only thing that separates a rescue from a permanent disappearance. The Navy doesn't rely on improvised methods during a rescue. When sea conditions make a helicopter hoist unsafe, a rigid hull inflatable boat, or RHIB, is deployed instead. Designed to operate in rough water, it stays low, fast, and maneuverable, allowing crews to approach the search area with precision. Powered by twin diesel engines, an RHIB can reach speeds of up to 40 knots. Its crew is trained to recover a sailor without fully stopping the boat, using a practiced scoop maneuver that depends on tight coordination between the driver and the crew member positioned to make the grab. What happens if the sailor isn't on the surface? What if the man overboard is actually an entire crew trapped? This is where the Submarine Rescue Diving and Recompression System, or the SRDS, comes in to help. It's not just a diving bell, it is a pressurized flyaway system that can be loaded onto a civilian vessel of opportunity within hours. The system uses the Pressurized Rescue Module, or PRM, nicknamed Falcon. It is a tethered, remotely operated vehicle that swims down to a sunken sub. It mates with the escape hatch, creating a watertight seal. It can pull 16 sailors out at a time from depths of up to 2,000 feet, where the pressure would crush a human like a soda can. But the rescue doesn't end when they reach the surface. These sailors have been under high pressure. If you just open the door, their blood will boil with nitrogen bubbles. With that, the SRDS includes a transfer under pressure system, allowing the sailors to move directly from the rescue sub into a decompression chamber without ever touching the outside air. So every tool, every procedure, and every trained crew member works together to rescue sailors in situations where normal methods would fail. It is technology and skill built to fight the ocean itself. Now, returning back to Ian McKnight, after 48 hours, the Navy called off the search. Why? Because the math of the ocean is cruel. Based on the water temperature and the drift model, which is a computer program called SIROPS, the Navy can predict with 99% accuracy when a human body will cease to be viable. When that clock hits zero, the mission shifts from search and rescue to search and recovery. The Navy doesn't stop because they want to. They stop because the ocean has already won. It's a moment of profound silence on the ship. when the all clear is finally given, but the sailor isn't back on board. It is a paradox of naval service that calm seas are often the most dangerous. In heavy waves, sailors stay alert, tethered to safety lines and wearing flotation gear. In smooth, mirror-like water, however, complacency sets in. Analysis of 50 years of Navy man-overboard reports shows that 90% of fatalities happen in calm conditions. On a carrier, a sailor might lean over a catwalk or step near the edge, believing the deck is safe. If they slip, there is no crash of waves to mark the fall and no immediate alarm. By the time the incident is noticed, the search area can expand from a few square miles to a zone larger than Rhode Island, making rescue exponentially more difficult. Modern systems, like the submarine rescue diving recompression system, didn't appear overnight. They were born out of tragedy. In 1963, the USS Thresher imploded at 1,300 feet, killing all 129 aboard. Worse, the Navy had no way to reach a disabled submarine or rescue its crew. This disaster led to the SubSafe program, setting strict engineering standards for submarines, and to the creation of the Undersea Rescue Command. Its roots go even further back to the 1939 USS Squalus rescue, when divers using the primitive McCann rescue bell hauled 33 men from the ocean floor in freezing, pitch-black conditions. Today, ROVs with cameras and hydraulic arms perform similar rescues in minutes, tasks that once took rescuers hours of life-threatening effort. When the SAROPS, or Search and Rescue Optimal Planning System computer, indicates that probability of survival has dropped below 1%, the tone of the ship changes, and the constant roar of helicopter rotors dies down. The lookout watches are secured. The transition from a rescue mission to a recovery mission is a psychologically heavy lift for the crew. On a carrier like the George Washington, everyone knows someone connected to the missing sailor. And to stop looking is to admit that the ocean has claimed one of your own. If a body is recovered or if a sailor passes away during a long deployment where a return to port is weeks away, the Navy initiates the burial at sea. A Navy burial at sea is far from a simple act of disposal. It is a carefully orchestrated ceremony, shaped by winds, waves, and the motion of a massive ship. The medical team and the chaplain prepare the sailor's remains, dressing them in full dress blues, complete with medals and gloves. Some are placed in a weighted casket designed to sink quickly, while others are wrapped in a hand-stitched weighted shroud. The ship must be underway, moving slowly to maintain stability. The crew forms in silence, hundreds of sailors standing in divisional formation. The only sounds are the hum of the engines and the wind through the antenna wires. At the edge of the deck, the honor guard carries the casket or shroud to the tilting board, the flag draped carefully over the remains. Chaplain delivers the committal, and on the command, the body slides into the sea while the pallbearers hold the flag clear of the deck and the water. A 21-gun salute echoes across the steel deck, followed by the haunting notes of taps played from the ship's command tower. The flag is folded and later presented to the family, but the ceremony concludes with a single command: carry on. For the living crew, these words are more than protocol. They are a vow that the ship endures, the mission continues, and the sailor's service remains honored through the ship's steadfast motion across the ocean. So, if you still think, why does the U.S. Navy spend millions of dollars in fuel, flight hours, and satellite time just to find a lost sailor? It's because of the sacred contract. When a young man or woman signs their name to serve on a nuclear-powered warship, they are moving into a world where self is secondary to the ship. In exchange for that sacrifice, the Navy promises that if you fall, the entire weight of the Department of Defense will move heaven and earth to find you. The ocean is wide, cold, and unforgiving, and it doesn't care about anyone. But sailors live in it every day, and the Navy moves through it with purpose, trained to act when someone falls. Every rescue, every watch, every maneuver is a promise kept. The sea tests skill, patience, and courage, but it also shows what people can do when they work together. Out here, the ship, the crew, and the water are all connected. The Navy honors the sails and respects the ocean, knowing that both demand attention, care, and respect. The next time you see a photo of an aircraft carrier, look past the fighter jets and the massive radar dishes. Look at the catwalks. Look at the sailors standing watch on the Vulture's Row. They know that beneath them lies an abyss that has claimed 72% of those who have fallen into it. They know the 60-foot drop is a 6-story fall into a concrete sea. And they know that if they disappear, their shipmates will execute the most precise, expensive, and desperate search patterns ever devised by man. The ocean has a way of reminding us of our insignificance. But the Navy's response to a man overboard is our way of shouting back, we do not leave our own. We search until the math says there is no hope, and then, and only then, do we commit them to the deep with the honors they earned. What do you think of how the U.S. Navy carries out this tradition? Does it surprise you? Impress you? Does it feel right that the mission must carry on immediately after? If this gave you a new perspective, give it a like and subscribe for more real stories from the world's navies. And hey, if you want to go a step further and support our channel directly, please join the fleet. You get loyalty badges, priority responses, and you help us bring more true maritime stories to the surface. Just click join on our channel page and get on board with us. Seriously, thank you for being here. Drop a blue heart in the comments to honor those who have been laid to rest at sea. I'll see you in the next one.